she went on this rant where I apparently was just, I set her off. And at the end of it, she goes, well, what exactly have you given me other than a bad marriage and a body that no longer works for sex? And I just froze. I literally felt like somebody, like Doctor Strange, punched my soul out of my chest. I just kind of was frozen there for a bit. And I did. I took my stuff upstairs, actually came up to this building in the studio where I'm at, went up in the loft, and I wouldn't say I cried, but I screamed loud enough that I'm glad nobody heard.
This is the Q Dropped podcast. Stories of relationships torn apart by QAnon. One of my favorite books from childhood is To Kill a Mockingbird. This probably won't come as a shock to those of you who know me and know about my obsession with wrongful convictions. I don't really know if the book helped shape me as an adult, or if I loved the book because I was already consumed by the injustice of being wrongfully accused, but I guess it doesn't really matter. I read it a long time ago, but it's one of those books that has stayed with me. Often I forget the contents of a book I've read, barely even recognizing it if I pick it up again. But there are some that take up permanent residence in my mind, no matter how much time has passed. Dharma Bums by Jack Kerouac is one. Herman Melville's masterpiece, Moby Dick, is another. But the two from childhood that are etched in my brain are Charlotte's Web and To Kill a Mockingbird. Harper Lee's debut novel wasn't just a story of injustice and trying to make things right. It was also a story about patience. The hero, attorney Atticus Finch, is one of the most patient characters in all of literary history. Faced with vile, hateful people, he never fails to keep his cool. He's calm after someone spits on him. He's composed when faced with the awful task of shooting a rabid dog. And perhaps the most convincing evidence of his patience was his willingness and determination to provide his African-American client with the best possible defense despite already knowing that he'll be found guilty on the basis of the color of his skin and nothing more. It's a hopeless endeavor, but Atticus nails it and proves he's innocent beyond all reasonable doubt. Tom Robinson is still found guilty, and Atticus knew he would be, but they fought within the bounds of the law anyway. Patience like this is hard to come by, but I found myself thinking of Atticus Finch when I spoke with my guest today. Sam has the patience of Atticus Finch, it would seem, and the ability to remain calm and collected when faced with sheer ugliness. As someone who is still learning how to be patient, I felt a deep admiration for Sam, who has heard from his QAnon mom some of the ugliest things I think I've come across yet in all of these interviews, and has somehow managed to keep his cool. Sam is a history buff, a gamer, and the son of a Q mom who he stands by and supports no matter what. Sam's journey begins in Florida.
So I was originally born in Florida, in the town of Clearwater. And I remember being born next to the water. I remember always living next to water. Honestly, my entire life, I've lived next to water. My first memory when I was in Florida was we had a big red tide outbreak. And since we lived right next to this little beach area, we had all this dead fish, stingrays come up. And my first word associated with the water was stink ray because of how they smelled. Lived there until I was about 5 and moved to Austin, Texas, right before I believe it was either right before my 6th birthday or right at my 5th birthday. It's a fun place. It's a very artsy city. If you like just the arts in general, a lot of music, painting, drawing, crafts. It's a very artsy, welcoming place. It's depending on where you go. Sometimes it might not be as welcoming, but it's a very nice, just good place to be.
Sam's relationship with his mom was great growing up.
So my mom was and is honestly kind of my spiritual and emotional pillar. My father is very much the academic businessman, kind of down to earth, kind of A to B to C to D kind of attitude. And I'd like to say that I got both ends of the extreme. I had a workaholic father and a spiritualistic mother, and they combined in the center to form me. So I had a very interesting view through my mom, where on my dad's side, it was very much, okay, how are you doing in school? How's this? How'd that turn out? How'd that grade do? How'd this do? How'd that do? And it was always nice to go to my mom, who would always ask, well, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Like, what happened today? Like, what was a lot more kind of emotionally empathic tied.
While his father seemed to be more of the disciplinarian, his mother was always a source of comfort.
There were days where I would come home from school, and if I saw my dad's truck in the driveway, my heart would sink because I just think, oh no, he's going to ask me about a grade. He's going to ask me about this or that. And if I just saw it was my mom home, it was like, oh yes, all right, awesome. I get to go home, relax, have fun. You know, there were days where I very much anticipated mom being there versus my dad being there.
No matter what happened or what Sam got himself into, his mother was always there to pick him up.
I remember in middle school, I think it was sixth grade. I got in enough trouble that I actually was in school detention for a day and a half. I kicked a foursquare ball into an eighth grader's face because he broke my friend's glasses. And so I got to spend some time in detention. My dad was not too thrilled about it. I got a bit of a lecture and just kind of like, oh, you bad person, kind of thing. And I remember going to my mom, just like, oh no, I'm about to get it again. She's going to be upset. And first thing she did was come up and hug me and say, well, I heard you had kind of a rough day. Don't you want to just kind of rest for a bit? I can make you something. And I started crying just because I didn't expect her to not ask about it.
The relationship between Sam and his mother was strengthened by little rituals that he cherished.
We used to watch shows like Ghost Adventures all the time. We used to have days where we would literally isolate a day in the weekend and marathon all of the Lord of the Rings extended editions, which takes about 15 hours to do. It's quite an investment. And it was kind of a ritual where we do it, once every few months or like at the end of the school year. It was like, all right, we finished the year. We get to go have our movie marathon. Every time we'd get in the car together, she'd turn around in the driver's seat and go, well, Sam, tell me something I don't know. And I would just have to search through my brain and think like, well, what have we talked about? I'm like, oh, okay. And then just, come up with something. And it was always kind of my way of like sharpening, just, all right, I need to get better. I need to find something that we haven't talked about. And it was something we did for many years. Many years we did that.
Sam is grateful for both of his parents and how they raised him, but there was always that special bond he had with his mother.
She was kind of my example to lead by, where like when I hope to have kids one day, I want to be as aware as my dad of what they're doing, but I want to have the same approach as my mom, where if they don't do well on something, it's not, well, you're just irresponsible or are lazy. And again, my dad's not a bad person, just that sometimes was the two catchphrases he would do. But my mom would always take the approach of like, well, like, what don't you understand? What'd you have trouble with? And it was a very much like, if you didn't do well, okay, that's that. Now, how do we fix it? And that always gave me a sense of, even if it was bad, like if I failed a test and like didn't do well at all, I at least could rely on mom kind of being there to like, okay, well, you'll do better. Like just study harder and keep it up. There were days where that was the most rewarding experience coming out of school, was just knowing that even if my dad was upset, even he would cool off and come back like, okay, well, you'll do better. Mom was always in my corner.
Growing up, Sam's family was religious, but very loosely so, while his mother subscribed to a more spiritual worldview.
I'm baptized Methodist. And as far as I know, I think my mom and dad are as well. But my mom was much more spiritually conscious back then versus religiously conscious. Within the last 5 or 6 years, I would say it's kind of switched over to where she now has a lot more of a like God and Christian based faith versus just a spiritual sort of broader outlook. As a kid, it was very much a live by the 10 Commandments, live your life in a good Christian way. We didn't go to church that often. We were kind of, I remember in high school, I dated a Catholic girl, and the joke was that Methodists were lazy Christians. So we only went every once in a while. And it was, I accepted it. It was something where I acknowledged that I was Christian. But when people asked me, well, do you go pray? It's like, well, not really. I would definitely say that my mom's skew of Christianity that she believes in now has influenced my kind of drawing away from Christendom mainly.
With the support he got from his mom and the motivation he got from his dad, Sam started on his college career, which led him to his life's passion, history.
So I graduated with a bachelor's in maritime studies and a double minor in anthropology and history. It was essentially the mingling of anthropology, marine history, and maritime anthropology, the study of humanity and its impact on the oceans and the ocean's impact on them. Since I was a kid, I've always had an interest in history, just kind of the study of people. I would say it was probably in middle school that my interest in military history really kicked in, where I studied a lot of, sounds kind of bad, but where I studied war being in middle school. I was a big fan of studying Pearl Harbor, for instance. I studied World War II. I studied, Civil War, Roman history. And especially with something like war, it's often something that people don't want to look at because it's nasty, it's graphic, it's gory, it's vile. But there is a great deal of importance to learn about the trauma of that experience, so that way we do not repeat it in the future, and so that way we give honor to those who went through it in the past.
In speaking with Sam, I felt his enthusiasm for history. For Sam, it's not just about learning from past mistakes. It seems his passion has also led to a better understanding of his family history.
My grandfather, who passed away about a year ago, was a World War II veteran of both theaters. He was in the European and the Pacific theater. And I remember being a kid, and I was always fascinated to, ask him, where were you? What'd you do? In my own ignorance as a kid, I always assumed I'd ask him about battles. I'd ask him about those big moments, like, were you at this island or this or that? Just the complete kid questions you'd imagine asking a vet if you ever met him. And it wasn't until I kind of got late middle school into high school that I started understanding the context and really asking him actual good questions of okay, well, do you remember what this was like? Do you remember what this was? And it occurred to me during this, as a kid, when I was asking him these things, I always assumed dad had done the same thing and, asked his father about his experiences. Turns out he really didn't talk much about it. And so my father was also learning about a lot of my grandfather's experience as I was learning about them. And there were times where we would talk about stuff, me and Papa, that my dad would kind of look at me and say, I didn't know that. I was never told that. And after he passed away, I remember we would always talk about, he would always go find his medals, his ribbons, all of his stuff, and he couldn't find them. And that always bugged me because I knew he wanted to find them so that way he could, show them, and that way he could know he had them. And when he passed away, it was that thought in my head of just, oh, I need to get there and find them because I know they're there. I know he has them. We get into his apartment, and it's kind of surreal going into your grandparents' apartment after they passed away, where everything's just left as it is. And as we were going in there and finding stuff, my dad comes out with this little, looks like a kind of a silver pill case about this big. And he says, I think I know what this is, but I'm not sure. And he pops open the top of it. And right there on the top of it is a German Nazi armband, handmade armband. And my dad recognized it when he had been a kid. He found it at one point and was wearing it and kind of goofing off with it. And my grandfather apparently saw him with it and was like, hey, just give that to me. Wasn't mean, but just hey, just let me see that. Took it up and never showed it to him again. Just put it away. And that was the first time he'd seen it since then. And we take off this armband, and underneath it are all of his medals, his ribbons.
It's clear that family means a lot to Sam, which is why the story of how his mom got lost down the rabbit hole is so heartbreaking. Not only has Sam lost her to the madness of QAnon, but Sam's father has lost her too. Sam describes his father as a very logical person. His thinking has always been based in reason, but he says his mom seemed that way too.
Thankfully enough, my dad has actually kept that logical side of him. It's interesting because my mom has gone very much down the QAnon path. My dad is very much, I don't mean this to sound disrespectful to his attitude, but he kind of takes the blunt force trauma to the head approach when it comes to that kind of stuff, where it's just very, does that make sense? No. Okay, then it's probably crazy. And it's, thankfully, he basically just turns a blind eye to it and really doesn't mess with it. My mom is the one who's really gravitated towards it. I would definitely say my mom has taken a harder turn.
This turn Sam's mother took seems to have started with President Barack Obama.
My mom had, let's just say, very interesting beliefs about President Barack Obama, notably that he wasn't born in Hawaii, that he was Muslim. And there was always this weird, she wouldn't say why that was bad, but she would just connotate it like it was bad. Like, well, he might be a Muslim. It's like, well, okay. And she'd go, well, and that's not good. It's like, well, okay, but why? And she wouldn't really elaborate.
Things would become infinitely weirder when Trump ran for president.
I remember during the election of Donald Trump, what really stuck out to me was my mom was very much into the kind of conspiratorial stuff around Hillary Clinton, which I remember, like, she would always talk about, like, how she had bodies in the closet, how she orchestrated the Benghazi thing, how she had all this stuff. And I don't remember the exact day that it happened, but I remember it was kind of in the year like 2016, 2015-ish, that I remember Pizzagate first came up. And I didn't really understand it at the time because I think I just graduated high school when she started talking about this. So again, like, I was in college, my head was totally elsewhere. And it was something where I think when that came up, that's what first got me to question, like, okay, where are you getting this from? And I would say around that time, kind of 2015, 2016 is really where she started going hardcore into this stuff and telling people about, oh, you need to, keep an eye on this person because they're reported to have, kids come by their house, or that they talk about pizza all the time. So that means they're part of this cabal.
We've talked about Pizzagate in episode 5, but we've yet to jump into the Benghazi conspiracy theory on this podcast. So I guess we have to. Here goes. In 2012, an attack took place on the American consulate in Benghazi, Libya. 4 Americans were killed. Initially, protesters objecting to an online anti-Islamic video were blamed for the attack, but as more evidence was uncovered, it became clear this was a targeted attack on the consulate by a terrorist group. Of course, as is often the case with the far right, they struggle to understand that explanations can change as more evidence is recovered, and that changing your mind with new evidence is, in fact, a good thing. Nope. According to them, this was a deliberate cover-up, and Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, was and has always been to blame. It's simply not possible that the official story changed with increased understanding of the evidence. Charitability is a rare thing these days when we're talking about the motivations of people who differ from us, but Sam seems to have it in spades. Just listen to how he responded to his mother's strange new ideas.
I would say that my initial reaction was to try to understand it from her perspective of just not liking somebody for a physical reason. But it eventually turned into okay, you have an ingrained belief that this person is evil. Like she would talk about Obama setting up FEMA camps and how we're all going to go into FEMA camps. And I remember there was a Walmart up the road a ways, about 20 minutes up the road, that had shut down and was being converted into some other new building. I can't remember. And my mother insisted that was being built as a FEMA camp, and that's where we were going to go once Obama was coming to take our guns. Like, she stuck with that. And me and Dad would both just look at each other and go, "You really? You can go see what's going on there. It's construction. It's a construction zone." And it just didn't. It was kind of like throwing peas at a wall. It didn't make any difference. I would try to find her side of it and try to see eye to eye with her. It really didn't pan out right because it was just kind of an awkward conversation where I'm trying to find straws to make sense of it. It really hasn't been until the last, I'd say, 4 years that I've really started actually challenging it.
Sam had trouble coming to terms with his mother's new worldview.
It really was something that when I was a kid, I took for granted that she knew what she was talking about because she always told me how she listened to stuff. She always kept herself involved. She mentioned how she got involved in politics as a kid. And it was kind of a shock when I was going to community college and I really started looking into the details of this stuff, and it just fell apart. And it shocked me really that there was that wide of a divide between her perception of reality versus most of the people that I knew.
The relationship between Sam and his mother began to take a whole new shape.
I mentioned earlier about how we'd always have a game of whenever we get in the car, like, all right, Sam, well, tell me something I don't know. That stopped about 6 years ago when I remember she asked, like, tell me something I don't know. And I told her something, a fact of history. I don't even remember what it was. And instead of like, oh, that's interesting, or like inquiring, her response was, well, that's really interesting, but that's not quite how it happened. And it was like, oh, okay, well, go on. Like, what happened then? I'm interested. And she just went on this tangent about, ancient aliens, extraterrestrials, how history has just been written by the wrong side and how it's all going to have to be relearned and rewritten. And I couldn't say anything, mostly because I was in the back of the car. And it just occurred to me kind of all at once that I can't do this anymore. I mean, this was something that we used to be able to do easily. And now to get the response of like, well, that's interesting, but here's how it actually happened. And just hear a totally random, wrong interpretation of something, which I honestly thought was kind of a basic understanding. And it was really kind of that moment that made me realize that my mom was being affected by something, that it wasn't just that she believed in something, it was that she was being compelled to continue to believe it. And that eventually brought us to where we are today.
His mother had clearly lost her grip on reality, and things became so muddled and strange for Sam that he was actually driven to start second-guessing himself.
At the time, I admittedly felt bad about myself because I thought I did something wrong. I thought that maybe I didn't explain it right. Maybe I brought up the wrong fact. Maybe I'd already said it before. Initially, I was more angry at myself because I thought I did something wrong. And it wasn't until a few years later, kind of when I was going back to college, that it really occurred to me that it wasn't so much me as much as it was just a gap of understanding between me and my mother. But to summarize it, it felt sickening.
For Sam, it wasn't about being right, or as QAnon believers often like to tell us, an inability to handle a differing opinion. The QAnon worldview is so much more than just a difference of opinion.
In my line of work, studying history and being what I would call just an amateur historian, I honestly like getting criticism if I am wrong. Like, for instance, if I got a date wrong, I like being told, okay, that wasn't quite right. That's good for me because then I can check it. That means, okay, I didn't get that right. I need to study it more. Okay, I need to make sure I get this fact right. It's another to just be told, well, everything you learned is wrong and it's going to all have to be rewritten. And you're going to be so upset whenever it all comes out. That's in a totally different field versus just being told, well, you kind of smudged the date a bit. And to be honest, it also gets under my skin just to be told basically, well, you don't know what you're talking about because you haven't lived long enough. Well, that doesn't quite work.
When Sam began to challenge his mom on her Q ideas, he quickly discovered how frustrating that can be and how quickly people like his mom will move the goalposts.
On YouTube one time, she sent me a video, and I didn't even watch the video. I noticed that the video or the channel it came from only had like 600 subscribers, but this video had like 300,000 views. I was like, well, that's weird. And I go and check on the channel, and it's out of Azerbaijan. And the other two videos on it, one of them is like some weird, he's like going through a forest with a machete. And the other one is a lawnmower video where he's showing off his like outdoor lawnmower for like 16 seconds. And both of those videos combined have like 50 views. And it's one of those things where I just looked at it for 20 seconds. And I even showed mom, and I was like, did you know it did this? And she goes like, oh, well, you're just looking at the video because you think it's fake news. And it's like, well, but I'm trying to show you that it kind of is. And there's been dozens of those. I've lost count of how many videos have been like that, right? You can just, as soon as you peel back even a wax paper layer of it, it shows that, something like that. Well, and even as like going through college, I've always taught to cite your sources. And it's really amazing how many times you ask them, like, well, where'd you get this from? Where's your source? And they fumble or they bumble on it. They're not sure where to point at. Or they say, well, I got it from Gab or Rumble. It's like, well, okay, but that's not the source. Who made this? Well, I got it on Gab. I know that, but who made this? Where's this information coming from? And it's very rare that I get a definitive answer to that.
Sam prefers to take a different approach from his dad.
Unfortunately, like I mentioned with my dad, he kind of takes the blunt force trauma approach. When I react to stuff my mom says, I call it misinformation. I call it detached. I call it misled. My dad calls it stupid, moronic, deranged. He takes the much more kind of hard approach to it. And I think part of the reason my mom believes more rigidly in this stuff is because she's tired of being told that by people like that. And I even had a moment where I slipped up and I called her imbecilic. And I remember she came to me one time and kind of acknowledged, like, I've never been called that before.
Predictably, Sam's mother didn't believe COVID was being portrayed honestly by scientists, epidemiologists, and health professionals.
To put it simply, as she put very recently, quote, don't ever speak to me about COVID again. She has a very, I really don't know exactly what kind of camp of ideology she gets it from specifically, because some of it comes from QAnon. Some of it also just comes from just estranged conspiracy. But she definitely believes that it's a method of population control. It was invented by the CDC and Dr. Fauci to, kill off Americans and make us subservient. And her view on the vaccine in particular is a lot more incendiary, to where, for instance, when me and my dad got vaccinated, we actually did it without her knowledge at first, to where when my dad got it, he actually found us both an appointment to go get ours. And then once we were there, we kind of talked with each other about, okay, do you want to tell mom about this, or do I want to? How do we want to broach this? So we decided we'd just do it together. We would both come back at the same time and say we both got it. So we came back, got our first round of the vaccine, got home, mom got back. We kind of had a little dinner meeting, and then we both told her. We both said, okay, I think dad started it, where he said, okay, well, just letting you know, me and Sam got vaccinated. We'd recommend you going to get it, and just, make sure that you have your bases covered. I was not expecting my mom to react the way she did. She got very emotional, very upset, and basically ranted at us that we were going to be sterile, that it might kill us in a year or two, and more or less just shamed us for making what she thought was a very poor decision, which didn't obviously go well with the two of us. Me and dad just kind of looked at each other and went, well, that didn't go well.
For Sam, there was a moment of hope when he believed his mom might actually get vaccinated.
When we were both going to get our second round of the vaccinations, something interesting happened, which was my mom actually considered getting the vaccination, the first shot. And it was, I think, a mix of me and dad kind of pressuring her, just saying, we'd recommend you getting it because if you're not vaccinated, you're just more vulnerable. And we'd rather you be, especially with her being a current as well as former smoker, we want to make sure that we just have her bases covered. She was on her way to the clinic, I think like a CVS or a Walgreens, to get the shot. And one of her sisters, she has 3 sisters. One of her sisters found out about it, calls her on the phone in tears, begs her not to go. Mom actually goes to the clinic. Another one of her sisters is there. Both of them more or less peer pressure her to saying, don't do this, just don't do it. And they kept her from doing it. To where today, my mom is still not vaccinated at all. And she basically treats it as, since me and dad got vaccinated, well, you're going to be sterilized and it'll probably end up killing you in a little while. She always says that people who take the vaccine drop like flies, which I've been looking out for flies and I haven't seen any. It's unfortunate because she also has a nephew who's really sick with lupus. And because, unfortunately, she also believes in the same things that her mom, my mom's sister, does, she's basically taken the naturalistic route to curing it, and it's slowly killing her. She used to be an outdoor person, actually has a master's, I believe, in molecular biology or in plant biology, like a pretty smart person. And nowadays, if you saw her, to put it simply, she looks older than her mother at this point. And it's sad. And I've made it a point to go over and talk with her a few times, once or twice, but it's genuinely heartbreaking to do because I will get in a conversation with her and we'll have this dialogue of like, okay, I can tell there's some of you in there, like there's a good person in there. And then she'll say the exact same things that my mom says about like medicine or about med beds or about, Fauci or about the CDC. And it just feels like I'm getting punched in the chest to where nowadays I can't stomach going over there and talking with her because it just hurts. It just hurts too much. It is another casualty, in my opinion, of an ideology that has already taken too much from my family.
Sam's mom's beliefs would balloon into a swelling mass of contradictions and absurdities that became increasingly hard for him to listen to.
Sometimes it's just I'll get a text about a video, or if I have my phone with me, I can tell you the last time she texted me about that. I think it was a couple days ago. She messaged me a video from, I think, Gab. It was talking about how Biden was resigning and how the military was going to come in and take over. Last night, I remember kind of eavesdropping on her listening to one of these channels. And initially, there was this woman that was talking who it did not sound like English was her first language. She had a very thick accent. And she was talking about how all these people had already been arrested, how all this stuff had already happened, but she didn't really provide a lot of details. It was kind of just this vomit of consciousness. And when I came back down later, it was Trump who was playing, and he was giving some speech. I don't know if it was a former campaign speech or if it was more recent, but what stuck out to me was the ending where he said, if we do not stand and we do not fight, then our country is gone. And that kind of encapsulates my mom's paranoia about the belief is, in her mind, the country is essentially coming apart, and it's due to AI, modernization. She also believes that we're going to apparently go back to the gold standard at some point, that all the money is going to be, collectivized, and that there's going to be this great redistribution. And there's going to be executions in Gitmo, and all these people have already been arrested. She believes that a lot of these people that already have been arrested are just clones. So like she believes that Biden is a clone, but also not. She kind of bounces in between them. She believes that Michelle Obama is a man, that she has male genitalia, and just all this other weird kind of stuff.
This idea that we're going to go back to the gold standard is commonplace amongst Q believers. In fact, my own parents believe this, and I'm fairly certain they've invested a good chunk of cash into gold because of it. Which is fine, of course, as long as they're not buying literal gold bars and shoving them in their freezer, like so many other Q folk do. The gold standard is, of course, a monetary system whereby the value of other currencies is measured by how much it's worth in gold. In other words, money was representative of how much gold you had. You couldn't have more currency than you could back up with gold. Internationally, the gold standard was used until the 1920s, with the last remnants of this system finally being phased out in the 70s. Today, we use fiat money as our currency system, which means we accept our currency as legal tender on its own rather than as a representation of an amount of gold. QAnoners and other gold standard enthusiasts like the idea of returning to the older monetary system because it takes the power to print money out of the hands of the government. In recent times, there have been politicians who have proposed a return to the gold standard, but it has never held much weight. U.S. House Representative Alex Mooney, a Republican from West Virginia, introduced the Gold Restoration Act in late 2022, which aims to take us back to the old monetary system, but there is little interest in allowing this bill to go anywhere. It is widely accepted that returning to such a system would create widespread economic chaos. If all money were to represent physical gold in the possession of the money holder, there would simply not be enough gold on Earth to back every dollar. Excessive deflation would be necessary, reducing the value of your dollar to pieces of gold so small you probably wouldn't be able to see it with the naked eye. In other words, the idea itself is ludicrous. There are simply too many people on Earth and too much money in circulation to return to the gold standard as it was without severe economic repercussions. But these are facts, and our QAnon loved ones have an aversion to facts, which means that many of them, enamored by the rosy hue of simpler times, have been hoarding booty like Blackbeard in Charleston Harbor.
Well, and I will say my mom has this larger than I'd like to admit collection of like gold coins. And like, it was something where I even tried one day because she gave me one of these coins that she had. She treated it like it was a big deal. Like, here, I wanted you to have this piece of gold. And I remember feeling it. And I'm not a jeweler. I'm not a smithy. I can't like handle something for 5 seconds and go, oh, I know what this is. But I know that gold doesn't have a crisp feel to it like a coin does, like a nickel or like a penny. And so I decided to do a trick. I took it into my room and I took a flathead screwdriver and I just scratched it a little bit right on the edge. And it didn't take me more than 4 little scrapes and just nothing but zinc on the inside of it. And I just had this gut punch kind of feeling of somebody just scammed her. You know, she probably spent a lot of money on this, what looks like a pretty hefty gold coin, but it's a piece of junk. And she has bags full of these things. I mean, several bags full of coins, little bars. I mean, it's something where you'd think like she'll come out one day and be like, all right, we got our family savings here. And you're just looking at it going, oh, we're so screwed. We're so screwed.
At times, the theories Sam's mom would try to sell him were almost insulting to him as a student of history.
Her belief is that these Anunnaki, these aliens, came to Earth when we were, a fledgling species and were harvesting gold from the Earth to sustain them. And so they used humanity as like a slave race to basically acquire this stuff. And they had battles between each other. They influenced the Egyptians so much that she believes that the Great Pyramids of Giza are power generators. She believes that, a lot of these structures that were made were built by ancient aliens, not by people, which to me, it's insulting because I took time to learn about history and about how people at the time gave their lives in some cases to building these immense projects. And to know that they were built by human hands is kind of a gratifying feeling it gives you a sense of pride in humanity. That at one point, people gathered together, sometimes not necessarily by their own will, but most of the time, like with kind of quick tangent, she believes that the people that built the pyramids were slaves. The Egyptians did not use slaves to build the pyramids. They used contracted labor farmers who worked during the summer and then went back to their farms in the fall and winter to harvest. And then to plant crops in the spring, work over the summer, harvest in the fall. So it wasn't slavery. It was an idea of you worked, then you did this, then you went back to work, back home to sustain yourself, and then came back, and the state provided for you. You had food, you had water, you had a commons ground, and you still had opportunities to go purchase goods for yourself. You could move up in the social ladder. So it was a very complex, especially between the late, middle, and early kingdoms, there's vast differences between them. But to Mom, it all just kind of encapsulates into one, and none of it would have been possible if it wasn't for these ancient aliens and this ancient builder race. She also believes that like ancient Norse gods like Thor is some, Anunnaki god. All these people that are mentioned in mythology like Osiris, and more specifically like in Egyptian mythology, like Osiris, Ra, Set, Bast, kind of all across, they were all real aliens that the people back then personified because they couldn't understand that these were, a different being. So they just drew them in a way that looks like how we would have seen them. Whereas to me, I can say pretty definitively that I know those people were drawn that way because my mom kind of forgot about the prospect of headdresses. And those existed back then. And it was very common for people to wear that garb to show that they were portraying that being. And also because in ancient Egyptian art, which my mom completely just lost, is that they would draw figures according to scale based on their importance. So if you had a bunch of servants, laborers, soldiers, they might be about this big. But then if you go to, for instance, the god or the pharaoh on the other end, he's that tall. I mean, he's much taller. And in my mom's head, that's that must be an ancient alien because they're that much taller. No, it's just because they knew that person was important, so they literally drew them taller. When she sees ancient Egyptian names like a Ptolemy or a pharaoh, and they would carry on the pharaoh's name for multiple generations, my mom would say, like, there's proof, like people can live like over 1,000 years. Well, the problem is a pharaoh, typically the inheritor of the pharaoh, would also inherit the name of their father, which means that, for instance, let's say Ptolemy II dies, and then their heir, Ptolemy, takes the throne. He might decide to take on the name of his father, Ptolemy II. So instead of having Ptolemy II, Ptolemy III, Ptolemy IV, you might have Ptolemy I for like 100 years, and then Ptolemy II for like 200, and then Ptolemy III for like 20, and then Ptolemy IV, and it varies because people might change their name, or you might have a different name just lobbed in there because you might have a pharaoh queen, or you might have a year where they really couldn't decide, so you had a surrogate. And it's stuff where, like, to me, that makes sense. But I try explaining it to Mom, and she just goes, no, that's what they told you in books, that's what they told you in history, and it's all wrong. And it's kind of like just having a reason hit a wall, and you can't negotiate with somebody who inherently thinks that you're already wrong. It's kind of a dead-end approach to it. I'd have to say that that's the most crazy thing, is just her belief in this ancient builder race and how all this stuff that, antiquity humanity built wasn't actually built by us, which to me, on behalf of those people, is kind of insulting to their credit. I mean, these people back then built these things with their own hands, and they deserve to be remembered for it. Not giving credit to some Martian who didn't actually come here.
Sam explained to me what he thought the motivation was behind his mother's new worldview.
I would say her main reason for doing it is probably because she craves a sense of validation for it. She says all the time that she feels like she doesn't have a voice in the family, how me and Dad don't listen to her. We think she's crazy. I think she is very desperate to find a sense of vindication for how much she's given to this. And I honestly couldn't tell you where that stems from. It might come from just before I was born, maybe how she was treated just growing up. I think a lot of it has to do with accumulated life experience, where she's been told she didn't believe in like spirituality. People would tell her that it wasn't real. People would tell her that she was crazy for believing in this. And I think just over the years of being told that, she's now in a position of kind of taking the kid approach of just putting her foot in the ground and just saying, no, I believe in this and everybody else is wrong. And I do think there's part of her that does it because she thinks she's doing it for us, where she thinks she's being the the sort of pariah for this belief, so that way me and dad can learn from it one day, over her sacrifice. And it's surreal to see somebody who at one point in my life was a very critical thinking kind of rationale, like, okay, well, let's break this apart a bit. Like, that doesn't work. Okay, well, don't do that. That doesn't make sense. To where nowadays she just will go on these rants talking about this stuff. And it just seems so detached.
Like most QAnon believers, her newfound ideas have given her a bitter, angry side, and one that Sam no longer recognizes.
There was one time where, full disclosure, I did pot as kind of as a medication for just stress and anxiety. It's something where I've gotten better about it now, but back then it was something I really kind of relied on a few years ago. And I can't even remember how it started, but I remember me and mom having this argument about something relating to QAnon. We had a disagreement. And I just had this sense of, I need to go upstairs and have a moment. I can't do this anymore. Well, I go upstairs to find my stuff and it's gone. Just gone. Which I panicked because I thought I put it somewhere. Somebody found it. I'm freaking out because I think somebody found this that wasn't supposed to. I come inside just in time to hear my mom slam the door on the bedroom, which is weird. It's like, okay, well, there's nobody else here. And so I start thinking, well, who else would know that stuff's up there? Well, she does. And so I go and knock on the bedroom door and I say, do you have my box by chance? She goes, yeah, why do you need it? I was like, well, I just, I want to have my medicine for a little bit. And she cracks the door open and basically says, well, you don't need it. You tell me I don't need my stuff, so why do you need this? And it kind of devolved into this kind of curled lip accusation to where I just started going down the stairs going, okay, you know what? I'm going to wait. If you want to do this, fine. Just, can you put it back down here, please? So that way I have my medicine. And she went on this rant where I apparently was just, I set her off. And at the end of it, she goes, what exactly have you given me other than a bad marriage and a body that no longer works for sex? And I just froze. I literally felt like somebody, like Dr. Strange, punched my soul out of my chest. And she goes back in her room, slams the door, opens the door back up, and lobs the little Tupperware box with my stuff in it, bounces down the stairs and lands next to my feet. She closes the door again. And I just kind of was frozen there for a bit. And I did. I took my stuff upstairs, actually came up to this building in the studio where I'm at, went up in the loft, and I wouldn't say I cried, but I screamed loud enough that I'm glad nobody heard me. And more recently, I think it was a few months ago, she said something that I would say really was kind of the straw that broke my back for having patience for it, to where I kind of have the mindset that I do now. We had some argument or some debate, and I can't help it. If I get into a heated situation and it just kind of seems ludicrous, I smile because it just seems crazy. So all you can do is smile, just like, this is nuts. And I remember, telling her like, well, Mom, I can handle a lot of things. Like, I do a lot of stuff. I'm patient. I give you all this stuff, but I just can't handle this. This is nuts. And as I'm walking away, I hear her from the fridge go, well, you're a lot of things, son, but a faithful son? I don't think so. And I was walking past my dad to go out into the garage. And I don't know what I looked like, but I remember he stopped and looked at me and was like, hey, how are you? And I kept walking. And thankfully I had a therapy appointment right after that. And yeah, it was hard for me not to white knuckle the steering wheel on the way there. But that was kind of the last just straw for me. And that was about 6 months ago.
Sam's mom doesn't think much of his education and life's work.
She actually scoffs at the idea of institutionalized education, like people who are intellectuals are programmed, and that, our professors taught us all this stuff because they want us to be programmed and they want us to learn a skewed thing of history, which I would have loved to have known that, because I actually took a course in pseudoscience at college, which taught us about exactly this kind of stuff.
Sam's mother doesn't have any post-secondary education and isn't the most savvy user when it comes to today's technology. She certainly doesn't understand that she, like the rest of us on social media, is being manipulated by algorithms.
I will say that about my mom, is that she is, I don't use this term really offensively, but just she is digitally illiterate. I mean, she knows the basics of computers, like how to get to Safari, how to do this. But if you asked her, like, how does a server work? How do you manipulate your email? Like her phone, for instance, she has a brand new phone, like one of the brand new iPhones, and she's convinced that it's making her hair fall out. And she also has this weird belief that AI is actually electronic Satan, which really is bizarre for me because I've played against AI on computers since I was like 6. So apparently I've been dancing with the devil since I was 5. But it's very just, there's a wide margin between her understanding of like technology from the 70s and 80s to understanding like a smartphone or a touchscreen. If I had to narrow it down, I'd say my mom gets her information from 4 sources: Gab, Rumble, YouTube, and Truth Social. And I actually had to help her install Truth Social on her phone, which was a real marathon of patience. And it showed me something, that whenever she would send an article and she would always say it's from Gab or from Rumble, she would say, oh, it has to be on there because it always gets censored. There's all this censorship going on, which is kind of true in the sense that her stuff, like her misinformation, is getting censored. But then when you tell her that, she rolls her eyes and thinks you're insulting her if you call it misinformation.
Needless to say, Sam's relationship with his mother has suffered in ways we're all familiar with now.
We don't talk about history stuff anymore. We barely really talk much about other stuff other than like cooking, or, if I ask her, does she need any help with something or anything, it's very brief.
Her worldview has also affected her marriage.
Well, and it has absolutely, it's between me and my mom, it's definitely affected, but it has absolutely affected their marriage between my mom and my dad. It's gotten to the point where mom has said on multiple occasions that she intends to go out, find like-minded people. And it's something where, a year or two ago, I wouldn't have imagined that. I wouldn't have wanted her to go. I wouldn't have wanted that, because I've heard how divorces go. I've heard how separations go, and there's never a nice, clean break. But now, I would say I kind of have the approach of, if you're going to do it, you need to do it now. I can't do this. Well, I'm going to go. Well, I might go. Well, I'm thinking about it. Well, I'm sick of this. Okay, then grab your shit and go. To where I need to understand for myself to brace for this. Otherwise, it just becomes this constant cliffhanger.
Sam doesn't see any end at all to the QAnon madness.
It's the fact that there is no sign of it letting up. So from what I've learned, kind of just studying history with different movements, I actually made a post about this on the Reddit. I believe it was called The Far Right. And the moderator of the site actually struck it for good reasoning, not to make him sound bad. The moderator's family was almost wiped out by the Holocaust. And so he made this long kind of paragraph saying, I appreciate the point you're standing on. I understand your anger, but I just don't like the comparison drawn to the Nazis because of the damage it did, which, fine, that makes sense. But the comparison that I draw to it was the degree of just rigid fanaticism that the people within this movement stand with, that there is no check, there's no doubt. What worries me is the fact that normally with cults, you kind of see this every once in a while people kind of break off and they're like, well, hold on. Like, I don't quite believe in this, or, I'm not sure if there's hesitation. I don't see that. I think, I honestly think she's going to carry this with her for the rest of her life. And it is something where now I am struggling to define her as the mom that I knew growing up versus who I know she is now, which is just may as well be in a different universe. I'd say my biggest fear is just I don't think it shows any sign of letting up. If anything, I think she's going to go farther down into it, compelled by the fact that me and dad, keep telling her that she's wrong or crazy, even though I don't call her that. I can't really put into words how frustrating it is to be told, well, you call me crazy all the time. I've never called her that once. And I've been very careful about that because I know she doesn't like to be called that. And she keeps saying, well, you just think I'm crazy. Well, you call me crazy. And every time I tell her, I don't call you that. I've never called you that. I don't even call her stupid. Even though sometimes I want to scream it at her. I know she's not. I know there's a sensible, good working head in there.
Sam has learned to cope by supplementing his family life with other things he loves.
I have crafts and hobbies and little things that I like doing. I'm a gamer, so I have games I like to play. Being a history nerd, I play a lot of War Thunder, World of Warship, stuff that has detailed models so I can nerd out over the stuff that's in there. Other part of it is I have a collection of artifacts, military artifacts that I have. Collecting that is a passion for me because each one of those to me has a story. And so I'm building up this kind of like a library of stories that I want to tell someday, where each thing has a personal side to it, or each one I can tie a story to a location, to an event, to a particular moment that I think is important to talk about. So that kind of all together, I would say, is one method, just finding a hobby, something I enjoy doing, something that keeps me going. The other half to it, admittedly, are my friends. I find myself a lot of times being reassured by their comments about what they think of me, where when I go home, I might, be told I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm too young. I'm ignorant. I'm programmed. I'm this, I'm that. And having a friend or a good person come to me and acknowledge God, you really just know this stuff. You're wicked smart, or, you're brilliant for this. Or they ask me for my advice. And that means a lot to know that I have somebody out there in my friend group who genuinely thinks enough of me that they would want my input. And even my dad does that, with the war in Ukraine, he'll sometimes come to me and say, well, what have you heard about it? What have you heard about what's going on? And as much as that might seem just like a father-son, little talking moment, that has really helped me cope a lot with having at least one parent still come to me and say well, what do you think? What's your opinion on that? And not immediately just answer it with, well, okay, unfortunately you're too young, so you just don't get it. So I would say those are those are the ways how I cope, is finding a hobby or a set of passions that you like, and then having good friends, members of your family that remind you who you are. If I really had to attach a third one to it, I would say therapy is something that I didn't realize I needed until I remember the night that I realized I needed help. And it was a mix of, I had some nostalgic memories for somebody back in high school that I was dealing with, which wasn't that as bad as it had been, but it was combined with seeing where my mom was going, that I remember in my room at one point, just with my head in my hands going, I need help. I need help. And I called a bunch of different clinics, finally found one that I've been going to for the last 2 years. And she has been really underappreciated pillar. She's really helped me kind of brace myself against a lot of this stuff.
I asked Sam if he had any advice for those of us out there with a QAnon loved one.
My main piece of advice would be that you're going to be fine. It's going to be hard. I can't promise, in my position where I'm having to kind of do a balance every day of whether or not I legitimately hate this person or whether or not I actually can, snap back and realize who she is. I have that moment of just back and forth, not being sure. I would want people to understand that this is an opportunity for you to discover who you are apart from your family, to discover if you have a passion for this and you're being told that you can't do it, prove them wrong. You have the opportunity. We all have supercomputers in our pockets, and we have this connectability that we've really never had in history before. It's the ease with which, like doing this right now, the fact that I'm in a conference call with you right now was something that 40 years ago would have been, I would have had to go in a server room and have like phones tied up and make sure that we can all like sync in, and we'd still have some kind of lag input delay or something, or we'd have to talk on some brick phone and I can kind of hear you through this like cone. But I think the advice I would give to kind of round it out, I would advise for people that are in this kind of situation, find something you enjoy doing. Find something you love. It can be a craft, an art, music, painting, drawing, whatever. It can be about reading. It can be about learning about something, using your hand, whatever. But something you love and enjoy doing. So find that. The second thing I would advise is find an opportunity to get space, whether that involves moving out, whether that involves staying at a friend's house, leaving to go somewhere for a vacation for a little bit, but finding time where you can go somewhere else where you don't have to come back in the door every day and experience that over and over and over. And then the last one is just take a breath, find somewhere peaceful, listen to music, find your own little spot, and just tell yourself that you'll be fine. That your adult parent can make their own adult decision. And just as you yourself are an adult, can make your own adult decision. So it's reassurance that you'll be fine. Because I remember thinking that for years, that I thought I was doing something wrong, maybe that I was crazy, that I was the one who legitimately just didn't know history. I doubted myself. And it took, unfortunately, this breaking point with me and Mom that I finally had to look at myself in the mirror and go, if I don't master my own ship, it's going to sink.
If anything, Sam's story is clearly one of patience. He has so much more than I could wish to have.
I had my mom one time slam the door in my face after calling me a libtard cuck, and slammed it right about there. It was like right in front of my nose. And I just kind of had this realization of, okay, and just went kind of off to the car and did my own thing. But it was this understanding of, as long as I don't reach that point of just rage, kind of throwing energy like that, that I can at least tell myself at the end of the day that I did everything I could for her.
Thank you so much to Sam for joining me for this chat. I am in awe of his saint-like patience with his mother, and I hope, despite the fact that it looks like this will never end, that things get better between Sam and his mom. A huge shout out to our patrons for making this episode possible. You can get an ad-free version of each episode, as well as bonus content from every show when you become a patron too. The link for that is in the show notes. Next week, we're back with another episode, so make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube to be notified when that goes live. Thanks for listening.